The white silk wedding dress hung motionless in the hotel closet, still pristine except for the single drop of crimson that had somehow found its way to the hemline. Sarah Mitchell stood barefoot on the marble bathroom floor at 3:47 a.m., her trembling hands gripping the sink as she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her bore no resemblance to the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just 18 hours earlier. 2 floors below, in the hotel's presidential suite that was supposed to be their honeymoon sanctuary, her husband David lay silent. So did his best man Jake Thompson. The champagne bottles they'd been sharing were still scattered across the mahogany coffee table, along with something far more disturbing. Sarah's phone buzzed against the marble countertop. A text from an unknown number. "I saw everything through the window. You have 10 minutes before I call the police." Her wedding ring felt impossibly heavy as she reached for the device with shaking fingers. The message had been sent from inside the hotel. Someone had been watching. Someone knew what happened in that room. And now, as sirens began to wail in the distance growing closer with each passing second, Sarah realized her perfect wedding day had become something else entirely. The clock on her phone read 3:48 a.m. when she heard the first knock on her door. Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of woman who got what she wanted. At 28, she possessed a type of calculated charm that made people feel special while serving her purposes perfectly. Her friends from college described her as magnetic, though her ex-roommate Emma once whispered to others that Sarah had a way of making people's problems disappear sometimes along with the people themselves. David Mitchell had fallen hard for Sarah's attention 3 years ago at a charity gala. The successful real estate developer, 32 and desperately seeking stability after his messy divorce, saw in Sarah everything he thought he needed. Beauty, sophistication, and an unwavering focus on building the perfect life together. His family had money, old Charleston money, and Sarah had made it clear from their second date that she intended to be part of that legacy. Jake Thompson represented everything David had tried to leave behind. His childhood best friend was reckless, spontaneous, and unapologetically authentic in ways that made David both envious and ashamed. Jake worked construction, drove a motorcycle, and had never met a boundary he wouldn't cross for the people he loved. When David announced his engagement, Jake had been the only person brave enough to ask if he was truly happy. The wedding planning had revealed cracks that Sarah expertly concealed from their families. David's mother, Eleanor Mitchell, had questioned Sarah's insistence on controlling every detail, from the guest list to the seating arrangements. She'd noticed how Sarah's college friends seemed nervous around her, how they spoke in careful, measured sentences whenever Sarah was present. Jake had seen more than anyone realized. During the bachelor party 2 weeks earlier, he'd watched David drink himself into honesty, confessing fears about his future that Jake knew Sarah would never tolerate hearing. More troubling were the phone calls Jake had witnessed Sarah speaking in hushed, urgent tones to someone she claimed was her wedding planner, though the conversations Jake overheard sounded nothing like discussions about flowers or music. The hotel staff at the Grand Charleston had noted Sarah's particular attention to their security protocols during the venue walkthrough. She'd asked detailed questions about camera locations, staff schedules, and which rooms offered the most privacy. The night manager, Patricia Winters, later told investigators that something about the bride's curiosity had felt distinctly wrong, though she couldn't articulate why at the time. Now, as Sarah stared at that threatening text message, she knew her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Someone had been watching, and whoever they were, they held the power to destroy everything she'd worked so hard to build. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as she pulled on her silk robe, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Ray Castellanos, his weathered face grim in the hallway's fluorescent lighting. Behind him stood a younger officer she didn't recognize, both men's expressions suggesting this wasn't a routine inquiry. "Mrs. Mitchell. Charleston Police. We need to speak with you about an incident involving your husband." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she opened the door, forcing her face into an expression of confused concern. "Officers. What's happened? David went to have drinks with Jake hours ago. Is everything all right?" Detective Castellanos studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd seen too many grieving spouses turn out to be anything but grieving. "Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance in the presidential suite. When we arrived, we found 2 men who appear to have been..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Both individuals were deceased. The scream that escaped Sarah's throat sounded genuine even to her own ears. She collapsed against the doorframe, her legs seeming to give out as the detective reached forward to steady her. No, that can't be right. They were just celebrating. David was so happy today, we just got married, this was supposed to be the best day of our lives. But even as she performed her grief, Sarah's mind was calculating. The anonymous text meant someone had witnessed what really happened in that suite. Someone had seen her standing over David's body at 2:30 a.m., had watched her arrange the scene to look like something it wasn't. The question was, who? The younger officer, Detective Maria Santos, was already taking notes. Mrs. Mitchell, when did you last see your husband? Around midnight, Sarah whispered, dabbing at tears that came surprisingly easily. He said he and Jake wanted to have one more drink together, just the two of them. You know how men can be about these sentimental moments. I was exhausted from the wedding, so I came up here to get some rest. What she didn't tell them was how she'd followed 20 minutes later, keycard in hand, a duplicate she'd obtained weeks earlier during their venue planning. She didn't mention standing in the doorway of the presidential suite, watching her new husband and his best man in a compromising position that shattered every assumption she'd made about David Mitchell. She certainly didn't describe the rage that had consumed her, or the heavy crystal award from David's real estate company that had been sitting conveniently on the side table. Detective Castellanos was watching her carefully. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions. This is just procedure, you understand. Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the story she would tell. The grieving widow, devastated by her husband's betrayal, discovering their bodies and fleeing in shock. It was believable, sympathetic even. What she hadn't counted on was the hotel's updated security system, or the fact that someone else had been in that hallway, someone who had seen everything through the suite's partially open balcony door. As she gathered her things, Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. The police don't know about the second keycard yet. But I do. We need to talk. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Someone was playing a very dangerous game, and Sarah was no longer sure she held all the cards. The Charleston Police Department's interrogation room felt smaller than Sarah remembered from crime shows. Detective Castellanos sat across from her, his coffee growing cold as he methodically worked through her timeline. Detective Santos operated the recording device, her sharp eyes missing nothing as Sarah recounted her version of the wedding night. Let's go through this again, Mrs. Mitchell. You said your husband went to the presidential suite around midnight with Jake Thompson for drinks. Did you see them leave the reception together? Sarah pressed a tissue to her eyes, buying herself time to think. Yes, they left together. David said something about wanting to toast their friendship one last time. Jake was going back to Atlanta in the morning, and they'd been friends since childhood. I thought it was sweet. What she couldn't tell them was how she'd watched from their suite window as David and Jake stumbled down the hallway, David's hand lingering on Jake's shoulder in a way that suddenly made sense of months of strange behavior. The late-night phone calls David claimed were work. His lack of interest in intimacy during their engagement. The way he looked at Jake during the wedding ceremony with an expression she'd mistaken for brotherly affection. Meanwhile, hotel security footage was revealing inconsistencies in Sarah's story. The timestamps showed her leaving her suite at 12:23 a.m., not staying in to rest as she claimed. The cameras caught her taking the elevator to the presidential floor, keycard in hand. Most damaging of all, the footage showed her returning to her own suite at 2:47 a.m., her white silk robe noticeably disheveled. Patricia Winters, the night manager, was proving to be a crucial witness. She noticed Sarah's unusual behavior during the venue walkthrough weeks earlier, particularly her interest in the hotel security blind spots. More importantly, Patricia had been working late that night and had seen someone matching Sarah's description in the presidential suite hallway twice. The first time, around 12:30, she looked upset, Patricia told Detective Santos. The second time, maybe 2 hours later, she appeared calm but moved differently. More purposeful. It struck me as odd because guests who discover traumatic scenes usually run or call for help immediately. She walked. The medical examiner's preliminary report was raising even more questions. Both David and Jake showed signs of blunt force trauma to their heads, but the blood spatter patterns suggested the attacks happened at different times, roughly an hour apart. This contradicted any theory of a crime of passion or a single moment of discovery and rage. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the forensic pathologist, had seen enough crime scenes to recognize staging when she saw it. Someone arranged these bodies, she explained to the detectives. The positioning looks intimate, but it's artificial. Real people don't fall that way. And the blood patterns indicate David was struck first, then Jake was attacked later, possibly after being awakened by the commotion. Sarah's phone records were equally revealing. The mysterious text messages were traced to a burner phone purchased with cash 3 days before the wedding. Someone had been planning this interaction, but the question remained. Was it blackmail or something more sinister? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma Rodriguez, Sarah's former college roommate, called the police after seeing news coverage of the incident. What she told Detective Castellanos changed everything about their understanding of Sarah Mitchell. There was another incident in college, Emma explained, her voice shaking over the phone. A girl named Jessica who was dating Sarah's boyfriend at the time. Jessica had a terrible accident, fell down the stairs in our dorm. Sarah found the body, was very upset, played the grieving friend perfectly. But I always wondered. Sarah had keys to that building, and Jessica had been drinking at a party Sarah threw. The timing never made sense to me. More disturbing was Emma's revelation about Sarah's pattern of relationships. She always targeted men with money, men with something to offer. But she had this thing about betrayal. If someone crossed her, if they chose someone else over her, she became different. Calculating. Like she was working through a problem that needed solving. As word of the investigation spread through Charleston social circles, other stories began to emerge. Sarah's previous boyfriend, a banker named Robert Chen, had ended their relationship after discovering her going through his financial records. His car had mysteriously caught fire 2 weeks later, a case that was never solved. Dr. Michael Torres, a psychiatrist who had treated Sarah briefly during college, contacted the police after seeing her photograph in the news. I can't discuss specifics due to confidentiality, he explained, but I can say that she exhibited traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder. She was particularly skilled at manipulation and showed concerning reactions to perceived rejection or betrayal. The anonymous texter remained silent for 48 hours, leaving Sarah in a state of constant anxiety as she maintained her grieving widow performance. She attended the funeral planning meetings, accepted condolences from David's family, and played her role perfectly. But privately, she was unraveling. Eleanor Mitchell, David's mother, noticed something off about her new daughter-in-law's behavior. She seemed more concerned about the media attention than about David being gone, Eleanor later told investigators. She kept asking about the will, about insurance policies, about when she could access David's accounts. When I suggested postponing those discussions out of respect, she became cold. The tension reached a breaking point when Detective Santos discovered the second keycard during a search of Sarah's belongings. Hidden inside her jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper, was the duplicate key to the presidential suite, a key that hotel records showed had been issued weeks before the wedding, during a private venue visit Sarah had made alone. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Castellana said during their third interview, sliding the keycard across the table. Can you explain why you had this? Sarah's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her story about never leaving her suite was crumbling, and she knew it. But the mysterious witness remained her biggest threat, someone who had seen enough to destroy her completely, yet hadn't come forward to the police. That night, alone in her hotel room under police surveillance, Sarah received one final message. Meet me at the hotel bar tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone, or I go to the police with everything I recorded. Someone had been recording. Sarah realized with growing horror that her perfect crime might have been documented from beginning to end. The question was no longer whether she would be caught, but whether she could eliminate this final witness before they destroyed her completely. The hotel bar felt like a stage set for Sarah's final performance. She arrived at exactly 8 p.m., her black dress and pearls carefully chosen to project the image of a grieving widow. The bar was dimly lit, filled with tourists and business travelers who had no idea they were witnessing a confrontation that would determine whether a double murderer walked free. Sarah scanned the room, her heart pounding as she searched for her mysterious tormentor. Then she saw him, Thomas Wright, the hotel's head of maintenance, sitting alone in a corner booth with a tablet computer and a manila envelope on the table before him. Thomas was 62, a quiet man who'd worked at the Grand Charleston for 15 years. He lived alone, had no family in the area, and was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his habit of working late shifts to avoid the chaos of daytime operations. What no one knew was that Thomas had installed his own security camera in the presidential suite service corridor, a blind spot in the hotel's official system after a series of thefts from housekeeping carts. Mrs. Mitchell, Thomas said softly as she approached his table. Please, sit down. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, her mind racing through potential strategies. Denial, bribery, threats, she'd used them all before. I don't understand what this is about, Mr. Wright. Thomas Wright. And I think you understand perfectly. He opened the tablet and turned it toward her. The screen showed a clear view of the presidential suite's entrance, time-stamped at 12:28 a.m. on her wedding night. Sarah watched herself on the screen, keycard in hand, entering the suite where David and Jake were sharing what appeared to be an intimate moment on the couch. The camera angle captured everything. Her expression of rage, her grabbing the crystal award, the brutal attack on David that left him unconscious on the floor. But the most damning footage came next. Jake, awakened by the commotion, trying to help his injured friend. Sarah's calculated decision to eliminate the witness, striking Jake with the same crystal award. The careful positioning of their bodies to suggest they'd been together when they died. The staging of the room to support her story of discovery and heartbreak. "You recorded everything," Sarah whispered, her face pale in the bar's dim lighting. "I record everything in that hallway," Thomas replied. "It's the only way to protect myself from theft accusations. I never expected to capture this." Sarah's mind raced through her options. Thomas was alone, isolated, with no family to miss him immediately. The hotel's maintenance areas were largely unsupervised at night. She'd eliminated witnesses before, though never under such public scrutiny. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic building in her chest. Thomas studied her face with the same intensity Detective Castellanos had shown. "I want to understand why." David seemed like a good man. Jake too. They weren't hurting anyone. They were living a lie, Sarah said, her composure finally cracking. "David married me under false pretenses. He used me as a cover for his real relationship with Jake. Do you have any idea what that kind of betrayal feels like? So you ended their lives." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes hard. "I protected myself. I protected David's reputation, his family's name. Jake was going to convince him to leave me, to start over somewhere else. I couldn't let that happen." What Thomas didn't tell Sarah was that he'd already made copies of the footage and stored them in multiple locations. His years of working around wealthy, powerful people had taught him to be careful, to protect himself from those who believed their money and status placed them above consequences. "There's something else," Thomas said, opening the manila envelope. Inside were photographs, old newspaper clippings and police reports he'd researched after recognizing Sarah's face from a previous news story. "Jessica Martinez, your college roommate. She didn't fall down those stairs by accident, did she?" Sarah's blood went cold. The Jessica incident had happened 8 years ago, in a different state, before social media made information so easily accessible. How had Thomas connected her to that case? "And Robert Chen's car fire," Thomas continued, spreading more documents across the table. "The timing was interesting, wasn't it? Right after he broke up with you." "You don't know what you're talking about," Sarah hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. Thomas had spent 2 weeks researching Sarah's background after capturing the footage. What he'd found was a pattern of violence targeting those who'd betrayed or rejected her, each incident carefully planned to avoid suspicion. She wasn't just a woman who'd snapped under pressure, she was a serial killer who'd been perfecting her methods for years. "The police are already asking questions about your past," Thomas said. "It's only a matter of time before they make the same connections I did. You can't eliminate everyone who knows the truth." Sarah's hand moved slowly toward her purse, where she kept the small knife she'd carried since college, a habit born from her first taste of violence with Jessica. But Thomas was ready. "If anything happens to me," he said calmly, "the footage automatically uploads to the police servers. I set up a dead man switch before coming here tonight. You kill me, and your video confession goes straight to Detective Castellanos." For the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell found herself without an escape plan. The careful control she'd maintained throughout her life was slipping away, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. Thomas stood up, collecting his evidence. "You have until tomorrow morning to turn yourself in. After that, I go to the police myself." As he walked away, Sarah sat alone in a dim bar, surrounded by strangers who had no idea they'd just witnessed the downfall of a killer who thought she was too smart to ever get caught. Sarah returned to her hotel room in a state of controlled panic. Thomas Wright's ultimatum had shattered her carefully constructed world, but she wasn't ready to surrender. She'd spent years perfecting the art of elimination, and one aging maintenance worker wasn't going to end her freedom. The next morning brought fresh horrors. Detective Castellanos arrived at her suite with a search warrant and additional evidence that made her blood run cold. The forensics team had found traces of her DNA under Jake's fingernails, evidence of a struggle she'd forgotten in her adrenaline-fueled state that night. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need you to come to the station for additional questioning," Detective Santo said, her tone no longer sympathetic. "We've uncovered some inconsistencies in your previous statements." But the worst news came from David's family lawyer. Eleanor Mitchell had hired a private investigator to look into Sarah's background, and what they'd discovered painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning David's demise long before their wedding night. The investigation revealed that Sarah had taken out $1 million life insurance policy on David just 6 months into their relationship, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. She'd also been secretly photographing his financial documents, building a comprehensive picture of his assets and business interests. More damaging was the discovery of Sarah's real college transcripts. She'd been studying criminology and forensic psychology, not the art history degree she'd claimed. Her senior thesis, found buried in the university's archives, was titled Perfect Crimes: How Modern Forensics Can Be Circumvented Through Careful Planning. The private investigator, Maria Santos, no relation to the detective, had also uncovered Sarah's connection to 3 other suspicious deaths over the past decade. Each victim had been someone who'd either rejected her romantically or threatened her financially. Each death had been ruled accidental or unsolved, but the pattern was unmistakable to trained eyes. Jessica Martinez's death during college was just the beginning. After graduation, Sarah had briefly dated Marcus, a name that slipped through despite her usual caution, a pharmaceutical sales representative who discovered her going through his client database. His death from an apparent drug overdose had been ruled accidental, but the private investigator found evidence that Sarah had accessed his medication samples. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and Sarah knew that Thomas Wright's video footage would be the final nail in her coffin. She had to act before he turned it over to the police. That night, Sarah broke into the hotel's maintenance area using skills she'd learned years ago from a locksmith she'd briefly dated before his fatal workplace accident. She found Thomas working alone in his small office, reviewing security footage from other parts of the hotel. "I thought you might come here," Thomas said without looking up from his monitors. "I've been waiting." Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I've made problems disappear before, and I can do it again." Thomas finally turned to face her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that chilled her. Resignation, but not fear. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I've been watching you for weeks, Sarah. Ever since you started planning this wedding. I know about the insurance policy, the fake degree, the pattern of deaths that follows you wherever you go. Then you know what happens to people who threaten me." "Yes," Thomas said calmly. "They die. Usually in ways that look accidental. But here's what you don't know: I sent copies of everything to my lawyer this morning, along with instructions to turn it all over to the police if anything happens to me." Sarah's confidence wavered. Thomas had anticipated her moves, prepared for her desperation. But she'd committed too much to stop now. What followed in that small maintenance office was brutal and desperate. Sarah attacked Thomas with the same crystal award she'd used on David and Jake. She'd kept it as a twisted souvenir. But Thomas was stronger than her previous victims, and he fought back with the desperation of a man who knew he was fighting for his life. The struggle destroyed Thomas's office, scattered his carefully organized files, and left both of them bloodied and exhausted. In the end, Sarah's experience with violence gave her the advantage, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Thomas Wright died surrounded by the security monitors he'd used to protect the hotel's guests. His last act was to trigger an emergency alert that would bring security running, ensuring that Sarah couldn't stage his death as an accident. As sirens wailed in the distance and security guards pounded on the office door, Sarah realized that her perfect crime had become a nightmare from which there was no escape. She was covered in blood, surrounded by evidence of her guilt, and trapped in a room with a dead man whose murder couldn't possibly be explained away. For the first time since Jessica Martinez's death 8 years ago, Sarah Mitchell was truly afraid. The maintenance office door burst open as Sarah crouched over Thomas Wright's body, the bloodied crystal award still in her hands. Hotel security chief Robert Chen, coincidentally sharing a surname with one of her previous victims, took in the scene with the trained eye of a former police officer. "Ma'am, step away from the body and put your hands where I can see them," Chen commanded, his hand moving to his radio to call for police backup. Sarah's mind, even in this desperate moment, was calculating possibilities. Chen was alone, the other security guards were still rushing up from the lobby, and she still had the weapon. But the emergency alert Thomas had triggered had already notified the police, and she could hear sirens approaching the hotel. "This isn't what it looks like," Sarah said, raising her hands, but keeping hold of the crystal award. "Thomas attacked me. I was defending myself." Chen, however, had been watching the hotel security feeds and knew better. The cameras had captured Sarah breaking into the maintenance area, stalking Thomas like a predator. Her self-defense claim would never hold up. The Charleston police arrived within minutes, led by Detective Castellanos, who'd been expecting something like this. Sarah's desperate attempt to eliminate the witness had only accelerated her downfall, providing the direct evidence they needed to arrest her for multiple murders. But the real turning point came when Chen discovered Thomas's hidden cache of evidence. The maintenance worker had been even more thorough than anyone realized, collecting not just the video footage from Sarah's wedding night, but also documentation linking her to every suspicious death in her past. In a fireproof safe hidden behind his filing cabinet, Thomas had assembled what amounted to a complete dossier on Sarah Mitchell's criminal career. Police reports, newspaper clippings, insurance claims, and most damaging of all, copies of Sarah's college research into forensic countermeasures. Detective Santos found Thomas's journal, where he'd documented weeks of surveillance on Sarah. His entries revealed a man who'd recognized evil when he saw it and had dedicated his final weeks to ensuring justice. Subject exhibits classic psychopathic behaviors, Thomas had written. Complete lack of empathy, superficial charm, and an ability to manipulate others while maintaining perfect emotional control. She's not just a killer, she's a predator who's been perfecting her methods for years. The journal also revealed Thomas's personal motivation for pursuing Sarah so relentlessly. His younger sister had died in college under circumstances remarkably similar to Jessica Martinez's death, a suspicious fall downstairs that was ruled accidental. Thomas had spent years wondering if there might be a connection, and Sarah's face in the news had triggered those old suspicions. As paramedics confirmed Thomas's death and crime scene technicians processed the evidence, Sarah was formally arrested for the murders of David Mitchell, Jake Thompson, and Thomas Wright. The charges would soon expand as investigators followed the trail of evidence Thomas had assembled. The most crucial discovery came from Thomas's computer, where he'd been corresponding with other investigators across the country who'd been tracking similar patterns of suspicious deaths. Sarah's victims numbered far more than anyone had initially suspected, stretching back to her high school years and including both romantic partners and perceived threats to her carefully constructed life. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the forensic pathologist, found defensive wounds on Thomas's hands that told the story of his final moments. He fought hard, she explained to the detectives. The blood spatter patterns and wound angles are consistent with self-defense, not an attack. Sarah Mitchell was clearly the aggressor here. The hotel's complete security footage showed Sarah's methodical approach to eliminating Thomas, her calm demeanor as she planned the attack, and her complete lack of remorse, even as she killed him. It was a stark contrast to the grieving widow persona she'd maintained for days. Eleanor Mitchell, David's mother, broke down when investigators showed her the evidence. "She fooled us all," Eleanor sobbed. "David thought he was marrying someone who loved him, but she was just planning his death from the beginning." The revelation that David's affair with Jake had been the trigger for their murders provided a motive that made sense to investigators, but it also revealed the depth of Sarah's deception. She'd known about David's sexuality for months, possibly years, and had been planning to use it against him. Jake's family, devastated by his death, found some comfort in knowing the truth about what had happened that night. Jake died trying to help David, his sister told reporters. Even after he was attacked, he was trying to save his best friend. That's the kind of person Jake was. As Sarah sat in a holding cell awaiting arraignment, she finally understood that her perfect crime had been doomed from the moment she'd chosen violence over acceptance. Thomas Wright, a man she'd dismissed as an insignificant obstacle, had proven to be the architect of her destruction. The web of lies and murder she'd spent years constructing was unraveling, and there was no escape plan sophisticated enough to save her now. The trial of Sarah Mitchell became a media sensation that gripped Charleston and beyond. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculating predator who'd spent years perfecting the art of murder, while Sarah's defense team struggled to create reasonable doubt in the face of overwhelming evidence. The prosecution's case was anchored by Thomas Wright's video footage, which showed Sarah's crimes in brutal detail. Jurors watched in horrified silence as the recordings captured her methodical elimination of David and Jake, followed by her careful staging of the crime scene. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, whose connection to victim Jessica Martinez was revealed during pre-trial proceedings, presented Sarah's pattern of violence with devastating effectiveness. The prosecution linked Sarah to 7 suspicious deaths over the past decade, each following her signature method of making murder look accidental. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Martinez said during her opening statement, "you are about to witness the unmasking of one of the most dangerous predators in recent memory. Sarah Mitchell didn't just kill her husband and his best friend in a moment of passion. She executed a plan she'd been refining for years, a plan that had already claimed multiple innocent lives. The defense, led by prominent attorney Michael Torres, attempted to portray Sarah as a victim of abuse and manipulation who'd snapped under pressure. They argued that discovering her husband's affair on their wedding night had triggered a psychological break that led to temporary insanity. But their strategy crumbled when the prosecution introduced Sarah's college thesis and the evidence of her extensive planning. Her research into forensic countermeasures, the carefully obtained life insurance policy, and her methodical elimination of Thomas Wright painted a picture of premeditated murder, not temporary insanity. The most damaging testimony came from Emma Rodriguez, Sarah's former college roommate, who described Sarah's chilling reaction to Jessica Martinez's death years earlier. "She wasn't upset," Emma testified. "She was studying the police response, taking notes on how they processed the scene. I thought she was just coping with trauma, but now I realize she was learning." Dr. Patricia Winters, the forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Sarah, delivered a clinical assessment that chilled the courtroom. The defendant exhibits classic traits of antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features, Dr. Winters testified. She shows no genuine remorse for her actions and has demonstrated a pattern of viewing other human beings as obstacles to be eliminated when they no longer serve her purposes. The prosecution also revealed Sarah's extensive research into her victims' lives before their deaths. Her computer contained detailed files on each person she'd killed, including their daily routines, financial situations, and psychological vulnerabilities. She'd been hunting them like prey, studying their weaknesses before striking. Jake Thompson's sister, Maria, gave victim impact testimony that left many jurors in tears. "Jake died trying to save his best friend," she said, looking directly at Sarah. "Even after you attacked him, he was more concerned about David than himself. You took away someone who represented the best of humanity, and for what? Money. Pride. There's no justification for what you did." The defense's attempts to humanize Sarah backfired when she took the stand in her own defense. Her testimony revealed a complete lack of empathy for her victims and a chilling pride in her ability to evade detection for so long. "David betrayed me," Sarah said coldly when pressed about her motive. "He made me believe we had a future together while carrying on a secret relationship with Jake. I defended myself against that betrayal." When the prosecutor asked about her other victims, Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "People make choices," she said with frightening calm. "Sometimes those choices have consequences they don't anticipate." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. 3 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of evidence tampering. The evidence had been so overwhelming that even Sarah's own attorneys seemed relieved when it was over. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution introduced evidence linking Sarah to additional unsolved murders across 3 states. While she couldn't be tried for these crimes due to jurisdictional issues and statute of limitations concerns, the pattern established her as one of the most prolific serial killers in recent memory. Judge Harrison White sentenced Sarah to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each murder conviction, sentences to run consecutively. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "you have shown a complete disregard for human life and an inability to coexist peacefully in society. Your crimes represent a level of premeditation and callousness that demands the most severe punishment available under law." Sarah showed no emotion as the sentences were read, her face maintaining the same cold composure she'd displayed throughout the trial. Even in defeat, she refused to acknowledge the humanity of her victims or express genuine remorse for her actions. As she was led away in shackles, Sarah Mitchell's reign of terror finally came to an end. But the investigation into her past crimes was just beginning, as authorities across the country reopened cold cases that might be connected to her methodical campaign of murder. 5 years after Sarah Mitchell's conviction, Detective Ray Castellana sat in his Charleston office, reviewing the final report on what had become known as the wedding night murders. The case had defined the latter part of his career and led to the reopening of 17 cold cases across 4 states, with Sarah ultimately linked to 11 confirmed murders spanning 15 years. The Grand Charleston Hotel had memorialized Thomas Wright with a small plaque in the lobby, honoring the maintenance worker whose courage had stopped a serial killer. Patricia Winters, the night manager who'd first noticed Sarah's suspicious behavior, had become the hotel's head of security, implementing new protocols based on lessons learned from the tragedy. Eleanor Mitchell had used David's life insurance money to establish a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. David would want something positive to come from this horror, she explained during the foundation's dedication ceremony. Sarah stole his life, but she won't steal his legacy. Jake Thompson's family had found some measure of peace, though the grief remained overwhelming. Maria Thompson had become an advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, speaking about how her brother's sexuality had been weaponized by his killer. Jake was proud of who he was, she told audiences. Sarah used society's prejudices as part of her murder weapon, and that's something we all need to confront. The case had revealed disturbing gaps in how law enforcement agencies shared information about suspicious deaths. Sarah's ability to kill across state lines for years without detection had prompted federal legislation requiring better coordination between jurisdictions when investigating potential serial crimes. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had written extensively about the case for forensic journals, using Sarah's methods to educate other investigators about the evolving tactics of modern serial killers. Sarah Mitchell represented a new type of predator, Harper wrote. She used technology, careful research, and society's assumptions about women to avoid detection. Her case changed how we approach seemingly unrelated suspicious deaths. Emma Rodriguez, Sarah's former college roommate, had struggled with survivor's guilt for years after testifying. "I knew something was wrong with her in college," Emma told a support group for families affected by violent crime. "But I didn't act on those instincts. I keep wondering how many people might still be alive if I'd spoken up sooner." The investigation had revealed that Sarah's killing spree began even earlier than anyone suspected. Cold case detectives had linked her to the death of a high school classmate who'd competed with her for a scholarship, a death originally ruled accidental drowning, but now understood to be Sarah's first murder at age 17. Prison psychologists continued to study Sarah, hoping to understand the mind of someone who'd killed so methodically for so long. She remained uncooperative, showing no interest in rehabilitation or genuine remorse. Her only concern seemed to be maintaining her innocence in interviews with true crime documentarians and authors seeking to profit from her notoriety. "She still believes she was justified," said Dr. Michael Torres, the psychiatrist who'd evaluated her. "In her mind, every person she killed had betrayed or threatened her in some way. She genuinely cannot understand why society condemns her actions." The case had also highlighted how easily someone with sufficient intelligence and planning could exploit the trust of others. Sarah's victims had all welcomed her into their lives, never suspecting that their new romantic partner or friend was systematically planning their deaths. Detective Maria Santos, who'd been promoted to sergeant following her work on the case, often used Sarah's crimes as a teaching tool for new investigators. "She showed us that evil doesn't always look like what we expect," Santos told rookie detectives. "Sometimes it looks like a charming, well-educated woman who remembers your birthday and asks about your family. The most dangerous predators are often the ones who make us feel safe." As Castellanos prepared for retirement, he reflected on the case that had haunted him for years. The hotel suite where David Mitchell and Jake Thompson had died was now used for storage, too tainted by tragedy for guests. But their memory lived on in the lives Sarah hadn't been able to destroy, and the future victims her capture had saved. "The hardest part," Castellanos confided to his replacement, "is knowing that she's still out there in prison, probably planning something new. People like Sarah Mitchell don't just stop being dangerous because they're behind bars. They find new ways to manipulate, new victims to target among the staff and other inmates." Indeed, prison officials had already documented Sarah's attempts to cultivate relationships with guards and fellow inmates, always probing for weaknesses she could exploit. Even in maximum security, she remained what she'd always been. A predator studying her environment for opportunities. The wedding night murders had ended with justice served, but they'd also revealed an uncomfortable truth about the nature of evil. Sarah Mitchell wasn't an aberration or a monster, she was a reminder that some people are simply incapable of seeing others as anything more than obstacles or opportunities. In the end, Thomas Wright's courage had saved countless lives by stopping a killer who showed no signs of slowing down. His final act of heroism ensured that Sarah Mitchell's victims would be remembered not just as statistics in a true crime story, but as human beings whose lives had value beyond the circumstances of their deaths. The case files now gathered dust in evidence storage, but their impact continued to ripple through the lives of everyone they touched. Justice had been served, but the questions Sarah Mitchell's crimes raised about trust, evil, and the masks people wear in society would linger long after her final appeal was denied. Sarah Mitchell would spend the rest of her life in a concrete cell, but her legacy lived on in the improved investigative techniques her crimes had necessitated and the lives that future predators would be unable to claim because of lessons learned from her methodical campaign of murder. The wedding dress still hung in evidence storage, a silk reminder of dreams destroyed and trust betrayed. But it also stood as testament to the power of truth over deception and the ultimate triumph of justice over even the most carefully planned evil. If Sarah Mitchell's twisted web of deception kept you on the edge of your seat, you won't want to miss what's coming next. We dive deep into the darkest corners of human psychology, uncovering the shocking truth behind cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around you. From calculated killers hiding behind perfect facades to mysteries that have baffled investigators for decades, we bring you the stories that matter, told with the respect victims deserve and the detail true crime fans crave. Here's what you get when you subscribe. New spine-chilling cases every week, in-depth investigations that go beyond the headlines, exclusive details you won't find anywhere else. Stories that will keep you awake at night, questioning how well you really know the people in your life. Don't let another masterfully crafted killer slip through your feed. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because in the world of true crime, the most dangerous predators are often the ones you'd never suspect.